What is up, you guys? Diggerdan here, coming at you with another video. Today, I'm doing book review for Sword of Shannara. So without further ado, let's dig into it. Now, Sword of Shannara is a little special to me because it's something that my dad read and loved growing up. It's something that's been on my shelf for years. This is actually his copy from Library of Bob. So shout out to you, Dad. And I finally picked it up and read it. It's been on my TBR for years, and I just kind of always kept putting it off, just thinking, oh, I'll get to it one day, and as as an adult, reading more and more fantasy, and I hear a lot of opinions about some classic fantasy like Sword of Shannara, it's like, oh, it's just a Tolkien derivative, and just acting like you shouldn't read it because Tolkien's already been there, done that. And to those people, I would say, yes, Sword of Shannara is a Tolkien derivative. But if you like Tolkien, you will most likely like this. Because you got the dwarves, you got the elves, you got the humans. It even has some added things in here. I mean, I guess you can say in place of the orcs, now there's trolls and gnomes. So there, and then there's a lot of people that are very upset. After I read it, I was going through some Goodreads reviews, saying that the main cast of characters that you follow is just the Fellowship of the Ring from the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. And it's hard to argue that point. There are a lot of very similar things that are the same. But there's a lot of things that are different too. Like something in Sword of Shannara that there isn't is a lot of these songs and poems and things that, in my opinion, really slowed down Lord of the Rings. And something that Sword of Shannara did really well, I think, is when there was battles or when armies did clash. Like Lord of the Rings, you would get, in my opinion, like Helm's Deep for me was always like the biggest disappointment, and I love to see it on screen in Peter Jackson's version of Lord of the Rings, because it's a big epic battle between the humans just trying to survive and these oppressive Uruk-hai coming and trying to wipe them out. So it's similar, like classic good versus evil in Sword of Shannara, where there's the Northlanders, where it's the gnomes and the trolls, under the dark spell of the evil one, basically. It comes down to the Southlanders, the humans, and just tries to kill them all, basically. But anyway, in the battles that we got in Sword of Shannara, especially in like the last couple of chapters, kind of in the climax, most of the chapter is that battle, which personally I really enjoy, especially when it hones in on a couple of the characters that we've been, one of the 8 of the Fellowship, you could say, that we've been along with for 600 pages at that point out of a 730-page book. Like, you feel for them, especially if they are in peril or if one of them saves one of their comrades. And you're like it's a very satisfying moment. You feel very emotionally attached to these characters. So yeah, personally, like, I haven't read Lord of the Rings in years. I think the last time I did it was high school. I think actually like freshman year of college, I listened to them on Audible. And they were okay. But honestly, I would just rather watch the movie. Like, I know it's kind of sacrilegious to say as a booktuber. But I don't know. I just feel like if I want to get the Lord of the Rings experience, I can go watch the films and literally half the time, and probably get just as much enjoyment, if not more. In my opinion, that's for me. Again, I haven't read it as an adult in the last few years, so I might get more enjoyment out of it now. But that's where I think, I think that's where Sword of Shannara comes in. I still get a lot of that Lord of the Rings flavor, but it's different, where it doesn't feel as slow. Well, that's not completely true. The end doesn't feel as slow. I'm not going to lie. I was talking to Benjamin from Benjamin's Book Club. We were DMing back and forth. He was asking what I was reading. I told him I was still reading. It took me over 2 weeks to read Shannara. And part of that is because of the length. Yeah, it's 700 pages. But normally length doesn't bother me too much. I just got to carve out more time to make it happen, right? But sometimes when I did have that time to read a book, because I'm also the type of person who tries to read one book at a time. Bless you people who can do multiple books at a time. But especially in fantasy, I don't want to get characters confused between plot lines or magic systems confused. Like I don't. So I like to do one thing at a time. But anyway, when I did have time to go pick up a book, sometimes I almost didn't want to pick up Shannara because I was bored a little bit. It literally took like 300 pages for me to be really invested. And there were a lot of little snippets where there's a lot of good world building things happening, a lot of character moments that were great, but kind of everything in between that was just kind of boring exposition a little bit. But the second, I would even say the last act of the book really paid off, and it was 100% worth the wait. It just was a journey to get there. And I honestly, I can't believe I'm saying this. At least I think the halfway point, I'm just like, we'll see if I finish the book. But after having finished Sword of Shannara, I'm actually very excited to continue on the trilogy. Which again, I didn't think I would say that. But yeah, I have very mixed, very mixed things to say about Shannara. But before I talk spoilers or anything like that, I just want to say if you enjoyed Tolkien, or maybe you liked the idea of Middle Earth and things that happened, but couldn't connect with it, felt like it was too slow. I feel like Shannara could be maybe dumbed down a little bit version of Middle Earth, and it felt honestly cozy and warm, like reading it. But it still has a really great soul, has a good story, has a similar message. I'm not gonna lie, like a lot of the things are very similar, if not the same, compared to Lord of the Rings. But it is different enough to be its own thing. And obviously, it's got a lot of fans because it's got the original trilogy, then it has another 4 books in the second series following the original trilogy, and then it has a prequel. So it's like there's not a dozen, but there's a bunch of books in the series. So people like it, right? So, but anyway, before I talk spoilers, my overall thoughts or my overall score for the book was a 7.2 out of 10. Now, for those who don't know, or if this is your first time watching me, hello. But the way I do my ratings is that I steal this from Pseudo Ramble. There's 5 categories, and I rate each category out of 10, and then I take an average out of those 5 ratings to get my overall score of 7.2. So, overall, I definitely dig it. I definitely recommend it. So yeah, without further ado, let's dig into spoilers. Now, the first category I like to rate is emotional impact, and I rated emotional impact as a 7.4 out of 10. Now, like I said, I was not very invested, like the first half of this book, honestly. I just kept going because kind of the whole sunken cost fallacy. Like, I already had this much time put into it. I don't want to feel like I waste my time, so might as well keep going, which is a fallacy, and that's why people should DNF books. But this time, I'm glad I didn't do that, because I think at that point I would have always wondered, like, well, what if I finish it? What if I liked it? But again, I'm glad I finished it because I did really enjoy the ending, and I think it made up for a lot of the slowness at the beginning, and it really paid off, at least for me. So part of the reason, like having said that, part of the reason that emotional impact is so high is again just that ending. There's a lot of like heartfelt things that happen in the end, like with Allanon, like finally coming to Shea's rescue, as he's stumbling out of the Northland, just trying to survive to get home, pretty much get to his friends. Allanon finally meets up with him after Shea gets this sword and defeats the Dark One and all these things. And then he has basically a little powwow where it's just the two of them talking. I'm like, Allanon just telling Shea, hey, I'm sorry, Shea, I didn't believe in you. And I should have, because you did amazing, you did great, and originally I didn't believe in you. I just came and chose you because you were my last chance. You're my only hope. And I didn't tell you everything that I probably should have. I didn't tell you all the secrets. I didn't tell you everything revolving around the sword because I was afraid. It's like, that's a great character moment for Allanon. That's a great character moment for Shea because Shea forgives him. He's like, at first he was like a little frustrated. Shea was, but he's like, actually, Allanon, you know what? Who knows? Who in hindsight, like, who cares? Like, it worked out the way it should have worked out. And for me, like, that was just really touching from Shea, because you could tell Allanon was like kind of very disappointed in himself, but also very proud in Shea for coming as far as he did, basically on his own. So that was very high at the end. And then when Allanon, after having said that, explains to him, he's like, yeah, knowing he's a druid, he's not immortal, but he's got to go to sleep for a long time now, and basically saying goodbye to his friend. And that really sucks. And there's other moments too, like when Heimdall and Minion Lee are at the bottom of the palace, and kind of like the climax, in fighting off the falcon-crested soldiers from Stemian. They're like Stemian's like personal army, and fighting them off so they can close the dungeons, so then the Northland army can't invade through the basement or the dungeons of the palace. And just like the bravery they have with each other, and they manage to fend them off and either like wound or kill all the enemies, and get that latch and get that lock closed. But then Heimdall is like, he collapses and says Minion's name, and Minion comes and rushes over, and by the time he gets there, the dwarf is dead. And that, for me, it was just gut-wrenching. Like, Heimdall is probably one of my favorite characters, especially because there's been many moments where Heimdall has saved a lot of the Fellowship. I'll probably keep referring them to as, or just like individuals or the entire Fellowship or the entire group. And then there's even moments where you're kind of in Heimdall's head or his POV, and he's just thinking back to his homeland, thinking back to his family. He's like, I haven't seen my family in weeks. He's like, I hope after all this I can go see them. And he's like, no, I can't think like that. He's like, I will go see them. And like, then just having that in the back of your head when he perishes is just, for me, that was just so tough. That was hard, because I couldn't imagine being him in that place. And like, he did the righteous thing. He did the right thing, in my opinion. But heroes, like, their actions have consequences, and that just sucks sometimes. But having all said that, the reason, again, it's not higher than a 7.4 for emotional impact, it's just because that slowness in the beginning, I wanted to be invested. I really did. I bought into Flick and Shea being foster brothers. I bought into Shea potentially being the heir of the Shannara family in the Sword of Shannara. I bought into Allanon being like the Gandalf figure, where he's kind of aloof, not telling them all the details. And like, as the Fellowship keeps growing and more characters keep getting added to the band, like I was bought into it, but then there's just a lot of things that kind of slowed it down. But anyway, enough on that. Emotional impact, 7.4. So next thing I like to rate is characters, and characters I rated as a 7.6 out of 10. This is almost the highest thing. I'll just say that world building was the highest thing, but it was second to characters. And it's just because, honestly, every character in the Fellowship or in the band, all 8 of them, I loved dearly. The one I would say maybe not was Allanon, or Allanon, however you want to say it. But that's just because he was kind of aloof and distant, but he kind of had to be, at least in his opinion, as he revealed in the end. But all the humans, or in the book, Brooks kept saying the humans, but like when referring to the groups or the entire group, but that included the elves and the dwarves. Heck, even sometimes when he was referencing gnomes, he just said the men were in combat when it's the gnomes attacking humans and vice versa. So sometimes it was kind of confusing, but he said they're all men, they're all humans. But like I said, I liked the entire band. Balinor as kind of like that Aragorn figure, where he's heir to the throne of like the Borderland kingdom, and he kind of has not problems with his duty, but it's like he doesn't know if he's really the right man for the job. And then later it's revealed that he is, and just his relationship with a brother was really interesting. Durin and Dale kind of being the juxtaposition of Shea and Flick, like 2 pairs of brothers just looking out for each other's backs, was really interesting. And with Durin and Dale being elves, and Shea is half elf, half human, so he's kind of struggling. It's like, I love Flick, he's my brother, or foster brother, but still brother. He grew up with him, sees him as his brother, but then he's seeing new things, like kind of sort of seeing the starting of like elven, not politics, but just elven world in general. Like seeing, like when there's a scene when Durin like sees something or hears something that the rest of the band doesn't, just because he has a heightened elf senses. But then Shea realizes he noticed that thing too, and he's like, I have the heightened senses too, which is really just really interesting. Again, I love Hendel, and I love at like in the second half of the book, Kelset and Panamon Creel, the two thieves, like the troll, the rock troll Kelset, and then the red or the scarlet thief, with just one hand, and he's got the pike. Honestly, those two might, like, Paramore, like, he might be my favorite character. Aside, like, that isn't in that fellowship. He's just so much fun. And at the end of the day, like, yes, he's a thief and he's a scoundrel, but at the end of the day, he just wanted to do what was right. And like, that's when, like, true character, I think, is shown. Like, at the end of the day, when all the cards are on the table, it's like, what do you really do when it matters? And I think Panamon, like, really showed his character, and so with Kelset, both of them sacrificing themselves for Shea after he defeated the Dark One, and he can flee. And again, that kind of going back to the emotional impact, like them sacrificing themselves for Shea, who they barely know him, only travel with him maybe a week, and still they sacrifice themselves for him. Like, there's just so much good, like, camaraderie, I would say, like, just so much, like, good masculine energy, if that makes sense. Like, the opposite, like, non-toxic masculinity, you know, like what real men should do, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. Like, just a lot of those feel goods. Again, like, people say, like, Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, like, kind of the relationship they have is like non-toxic masculinity, and I feel like I got that in Shannara. Plot, this is where it dips a little bit. Plot, I rated it as a 6.7 out of 10, and this actually isn't the lowest thing. Dialogue and prose is the lowest thing. But plot, it's like, it's very straightforward. Like I said, it's, and like a lot of people say, it's basically ripoff of Tolkien, where it's good versus evil. You got the Fellowship, they're going on the hunt for the item, and then to defeat the evil one, right? So, but I mean, to be fair though, there's a lot of classic good versus evil story. Like, there's written all the time, right? But I feel, in my opinion, I feel like there was a little too much bouncing around from things that seemed not minuscule, but seemed things that didn't seem to matter all the time, until it paid off like a couple hundred pages later, and then it's like, oh, that's a cool reference, and that was about it. But I feel like in the first, like, about first half of the book, once the group is first established on their quest to go find the Sword of Shannara, and then Allanon is, like, leading them, and they just have all these different little obstacles to get through. It's like, it literally just felt like playing a session of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's like the DM is just trying to think of things to kind of fill the time. So it's like, oh, the forest is full of wolves, and then once they get to the keep, the keep is surrounded by bramble, but the bramble is all poisonous. And then, but if they get through the bramble, then there's a moat of poisonous water. It's like, some of the things like that, I think, were just a little too on the nose, and just like rolled my eyes a couple of times, kind of pulled me out of it a little bit. But kind of once you got past that, and then once it was like the breaking of the Fellowship, and then the group kind of had to go do their own different things, like when Balinor had to go back to his homeland and rally the troops against the impending army or impending invasion, and then when when Shea got separated from the rest of the group, and he decided he has to go. First, he was trying to get back with the group, but then when he realized, I can find the sword, he just kind of happened and did that. And then when Allanon and Flick was trying to find Shea, you know, so just like all these different things. Once they split up, ironically, you would think it would slow down more, just because you're focusing on only one group or one couple of people at a time. But I think that's actually when it picked up, because I was more interested. Okay, when did they find Shea? When did they find Shea? Oh, did Balinor make it back? Can he get the troops rallied in time? Did they send the message to the Elven King? Like, all these things actually, in my opinion, made it seem to go faster because I was more and more interested, instead of just, oh, there's a serpent. They got to kill the serpent. Don't get me wrong, that scene was really cool when they did kill that evil serpent in that, wherever it was, I forget. But it didn't seem like it was slowing down, you know? Next is dialogue and prose. Dialogue and prose I rated as a 6.6 out of 10. Like I said, it's the weakest thing. I think something that Terry Brooks, at least in this book, did a little bit was like over-explain or over-describe some things, but then at the same time under-describe other things. Like I know Robert Jordan, for example, one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite author of all time, people complain that he over-explains like what people wear and like the smell of the air and like what direction the wind is blowing from, things like that, which is fair, but when Jordan does that, I have a very clear picture in my head about the scene that is taking place and what is going on and who is there and what it looks like. Or with Brooks, he kind of does slight outline where, oh, they went in the dark, dank dungeon with the one torch and it was hard to see. Which it's not a bad scene, but I feel like it could be extrapolated a little more. But then there were other things when it was basically just exposition, when no one was saying anything but like the narrator, and it was just, I don't know, like I'm explaining that poorly, but it just kind of took me out of it a little bit. It's like the narrator is explaining this to nobody in particular, but it's just like something that the characters just know or observe. And another thing too is I have to remember it's fantasy, so it's made up storyland, right? But sometimes some of the actual dialogue between characters just felt a little clunky. But aside from that, like I understood what was going on, right? So it's not like the story, like the words are doing their job about getting the story across, right? I guess at the end of the day, that's what's really important. But yeah, overall, just not that's just not my favorite prose. And then the last thing I like to rate is world building. Like I said, this is the highest thing I rated at a 7.7 out of 10. There's some, I know, again, like I said, myself, this is sort of a ripoff of Middle-earth and Tolkien a little bit. But there are some cool world building things that Terry Brooks did that I really didn't expect and really kind of pulled me in. So like when the group first forms, and Allanon at some point goes ahead and kind of scouts out the territory, and the rest of the crew is kind of following him, and they follow down the wrong path that Allanon like marked, but then there was a creature that unmarked it, so then when there was a fork in the road, they didn't know which way to go, and of course they chose the wrong way. But the group that was separate from Allanon, when they went down that path, they found these steel beam structures, and it's revealed that that's an ancient city from basically like a modern era, as if like the U.S. today like had that building. And then it's explained a little later like world building, like in the book, it's like medieval fantasy, right? But thousands of years ago, there lived a more ancient, advanced civilization that had advanced technology and didn't rely on fire to cook their food or horses or their own feet to get around places. Like it was very advanced, kind of described as almost like modern day America or modern day world, right? But of course, just as all humans happen to do, it devolved into war between countries, and then because of that, or between the world, and then it devolved, basically went back in time. Basically sounds like nuclear war, kind of reset that clock for civilization. And that's where a lot of the different races actually came from. Like dwarves actually were humans once, but were driven underground, and because they were underground for a millennia or hundreds of years, they slowly got shorter and shorter, and they were half blind and all these things. And then when they finally, after those 100 years or after a couple hundred years or after that millennia, when they finally come out of the dark dungeons, and then they become forest creature or forest dwellers, and then now dwarves out of habit are afraid of tunnels and afraid of dark dank dungeons and like being underground. That's another thing I like about Hendel. Like he had that fear, but he would still go in underground when he had to, or go in the dungeons to save his friends. So that's just another interesting story. Like that to me is just another interesting world building thing, where it's like, yes, they're dwarves, but they're not the Tolkien dwarves that you think of, where they're underground mining for gold and diamonds and gems and all these things. And then it's not really explained about the elves. Allanon kind of hints where it's like, oh, the elves, they have a different story, and then never reveals really what it is. Kind of same with trolls and gnomes. So yeah, there's the trolls, the gnomes, the elves, the humans, and the dwarves. So it's really kind of the 5 races. And then I guess the druids you could throw in there. And then the druids too, like they're the all-knowing beings, but they became the all-knowing beings because after that, I'll call it nuclear event, where the world gets reset to ancient culture, or like medieval, is because, yeah, they didn't have the technology anymore, the druids at the time, but they still had the books, like the textbooks and like the manuals, and so they could still learn from those manuals and things about the sciences and about all those types of things. And so that's actually how the evil in the world came, because the evil druid, he was looking more into the magics and the mystical more than the actual applied sciences and how they can help the world, which again I just think is really interesting. And I think when people just say, "Oh, it's classic good versus evil," it's like, yes, it's true. I even just said that myself a couple minutes ago. But there's more to it than that, or at least how the evil came about is different than just the earth was made and there was good, but because there's good, there has to be evil. So, yeah, I know I'm not explaining myself all the best, but I love the world building in Sword of Shannara, and like I said, it does make me excited to go on to the next one. And honestly, the way this book ends, I don't know if Terry Brooks originally meant it as a trilogy or just as a standalone, and then it became a trilogy. Like this one, honestly, you could just read on its own, and you can be satisfied with the story arc that's there. Like I said, like I keep saying, I'm excited to move on, but it's like, if I didn't get to the next book for even a few years, I would still be satisfied with what I had, and I don't really feel like I do feel like I'd be missing out, but I don't feel like I'd be missing out on all that much, if that makes sense. Just because this was such a complete story. I don't know if I said this, I meant to, but Sword of Shannara almost feels like the incomplete Lord of the Rings trilogy just in one book, which I know technically that's originally how Tolkien meant it, and it's the 6 books, but it's one book, whatever. But that's more pages than this, I believe, because this is only 730 pages, or less than that. And I believe, depending on what version you get, it's like almost 2,000 pages for the Lord of the Rings. So, yeah. Anyway, like I said, Sword of Shannara, 7.2. Really mixed feelings about it, but in the end, I would definitely recommend it. I definitely dig it. Yeah. So if you guys enjoyed this video, or I want to know what your guys' thoughts on Sword of Shannara are, because I feel like there's a lot of negativity on it just because it's Tolkien derivative, but then also I feel like I've gotten a lot of positivity on my TikTok when I did my weekly reading update saying I was reading Sword of Shannara, because people kept saying, "Oh, I have so much nostalgia for Shannara. I should get back and read it. I need to pick back up a Terry Brooks book." So I feel like even from my audience, I get mixed feelings about Shannara. So I would like definitive comments down below. You guys telling me what your thoughts on Shannara is. So yeah, anyway, that's it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like down below. Want to see more from me, Diggerdan, please hit that subscribe button as well as that bell notification icon so you guys know when I upload each and every single time. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.